I'm Debbie with Impression 5 Science Center, and I'd like to welcome you to Sensory Friendly Science. This is an area where we do activities at home to explore science in your senses, and today we're going to do coffee filter flowers. This is a fun craft activity. It uses several senses, and you get to create some beautiful spring flowers to use. We hung some in our windows, and the materials you need are fairly flexible. I do recommend using a table covering because sometimes we're using inks that move around even though we try to go for washable. What you need is a coffee filter. If you don't have a coffee filter, we made some as well that use paper towels. And if you have neither of those, we also made some with tissue paper. They didn't work quite as well, but it still works. You will need a liquid to dissolve it in. You can use water. We do also have some using rubbing alcohol, but water to start with. And you'll need some sort of marker. We started with washable markers. We found that using different types of markers was great because you could see that different markers reacted differently. And we did also use some Sharpies for the alcohol ones. We'll get into that towards the end, but start with just markers. And you'll want something to gather them into flower shape. We've got pipe cleaner. We also have tape. So either of those works. Now, we like to explore with our senses, and I usually start with the first thing we're dealing with, which is our coffee filter. Coffee filters have a great texture to them. They feel a little bit different than paper does. They bend different. The texture is different. Mine are stuck together at the moment. They've got this great crinkly around the edge, and they make great noises when you squish them. They sound a little different than paper too. And we were starting with putting colors on them. So you can do this in a whole bunch of different ways. This is a very flexible activity. We've done some that we did splotches of color on. We did some that we did designs on. Do know if you make a design, the design will look different after you finish with it. So both of these had designs on them, and the design doesn't look like it did at the beginning, which is kind of the point, but it's nice to be aware of that before you spend a lot of time on your design. So we tried a couple of different things. We tried normal markers. We tried smelly markers. The smelly markers are fun to experiment with and play with. We didn't find that our coffee filter flowers smelled when they were done unless we did something to change that. So create your design however you want that to be, and you have a couple of different ways you can move forward with it once you've made it. One of my favorites is to take a piece of pipe cleaner and stick it straight through the middle and have the water wick up through that. This is the way that takes the longest because it does take some time for the water to wick up, and then something great happens. That water hits the water soluble markers that we've got here, and because they're water soluble, that spreads that ink out. It takes that ink and it spreads it around because it dissolves that ink and carries it throughout. Now, some of our markers are a primary color, and you'll still see the different colors of blue that are in them, but some of our markers are secondary colors that are color mixtures, and it will sometimes separate out the colors that make those up too. So you're doing chromatography, the science of spreading pigments apart to see what's inside of them. If you don't have the patience to wait for this to happen, there are lots of other ways to make this. My favorite is to fold it and dip it. So if I fold it in half and fold it in half again and fold it in half again, I have my pizza slice, and I can dip that right in there. I also have the option of spraying it with a water bottle. For any of these, like I said, I do recommend that you have a table covering down because they can drip a bit. But if I hold that just like this, my colors start to mix together as it moves up. Now, for our older kids, we can also use those Sharpies I mentioned. Said all sorts of different things, and you can combine things. We used regular markers, and we used gel markers, and we used Sharpies, and we used some of them all together. This particular one was made just with permanent black markers, and you can see all the purples and the blues that spread out of it. This one we did on paper towel. If I show you how we do it with Sharpie, these two were identical, made with Sharpie, and this one I put in water, and you can see it didn't spread the colors out much. This one we did in alcohol, and you can see it spread the colors out. And once you've made your flower shapes, you can feel the difference also in your tissue, in your filter paper. It's kind of neat that way. So this one I made with all permanent markers, and instead of dipping it in water like I did this one, I'm going to use our rubbing alcohol. You can also use the rubbing alcohol with the ones made with washable markers. It does something different, and that's what this one was. Be aware with the rubbing alcohol. Rubbing alcohol has a smell. Some people do not like the smell. Some people aren't bothered by it, but it's nice to be aware of before you're exposed to it sometimes. And if I take my filter and I stick it in the rubbing alcohol, a couple of things are great. One is you can feel the difference on the rubbing alcohol. The rubbing alcohol cools off your fingers really fast because it evaporates so quickly, and it dissolves this ink, but very differently. If I open this one up, you can usually still see the outline of what started, but it's going to start mixing together and spreading those out. Once you've made your flowers, this one, like I said, I didn't finish it because I wanted to show it to you, but once you've made your flowers, you have to dry them. To leave them spread out someplace where they can dry. If you've used rubbing alcohol, I'd say clean that up faster, because the rubbing alcohol, the smell can be overpowering at a closed space. Once you've made your flowers pieces, then you get to make them into flowers. And there are lots of ways of doing this. My favorite is just to grab a piece and crunch and do several of them together. You can cut them into different shapes. This one there are 4 of them nested in here that someone cut with petals. This one I'm making right now just has a whole bunch of different types mixed together. So I've got this bunch of petals, and I can take a piece of tape and wrap it around the base, or I can take a piece of pipe cleaner and wrap it around the base. My coffee filters feel a little different than they did when I started because they've been wet and dry again. They sound about the same. They smell, the ones that had alcohol in them smell a bit like rubbing alcohol. So we found some perfume at my house, and we made ours smell a little more like flowers, which is very optional. We've looked at all of these bright colors, and we're looking at how they mix together and spread out, which has been my favorite part on this. I'd love to see what sort of flowers you create. Please let us know, and we look forward to seeing you at Impression 5 in the future. Thank you.